All right, hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Now, on this channel, I've done some segments in the past about Occult Mondays, and today is Monday, but this is kind of halfway in, halfway out. I'm hopefully going to have another segment up that will be sort of more in the general tradition of Occult Mondays out later today. But one of the topics that I had been debating on using for a deep dive, research heavy segment was the works of Christopher Nemelka, Nemelka, Christopher Nemelka. And I talked about his organization, the Humanity Party, and it's not exactly his, it's more like he is the spokesperson, the public figure for the Humanity Party. I did an upload about them yesterday. I know that it's not going to be very popular because the short story is he is simply someone who is not that well known. But the reason why I wanted to talk about him on this segment here, and it's called Christopher Nemelka, Evil Ideas, is because he has a very, very kind of mixed platform. There are things that I'm hearing about him and his organization, the Humanity Party, and some of the other things that he is doing in life that I think are really insightful ideas. And then the other things I hear are just like bitter, distasteful, arrogant, unappealing in any sort of way, in any manner or fashion. See, the organization, the Humanity Party, is also partnered with another one of Christopher Nemelka's organizations called Marvelous Works and Wonder. They're like kind of spiritual, but at the same time not. What that sort of means is, all I've really heard them say of that is that they wanted to present the idea that religion is bad, but what they recognize God is that God is the human sense of spiritual direction. Like, God is a person's sense of self-direction and the moral compass. Like, that's what they believe God is. I'm not exactly sure how many members are in Christopher Nemelka's movement, because he is the only public person, and I believe there are at least 5 members on the board of directors of the Humanity Party, and some of the other people that work for them are named Tony, maybe Amanda. They've appeared in other places around the internet. But if we want to talk about the ideas that were put forward by Christopher Nemelka, he is talking about a one world government. This is the platform of the Humanity Party, mind you. One world government. They also want to abolish religion. They also want to just have wealth given to all people. It's a very, very far out thing. And their whole thing is just that there's that divide between the 99% and the 1%. And it's like, the argument is that it's not the 1% that's the problem, it's the 99%. Those people are the problem, because they're actually desperately trying to get into the 1%, they're just not succeeding. And it's that mentality that is dragging humanity down. And when I heard that, I was like, it's kind of what I said at the beginning when I was like, well, I can see that that's almost a really insightful statement. On the other hand, I don't know, there's something distasteful about the way they're presenting that. There's something that kind of just puts you off, where you're like, what exactly do you mean by that? I mean, yeah, I can understand that, the British novelist Ian Rankin addresses this problem very clearly. He wrote the Inspector Rebus series, and there's one person in there that would be called what we kind of know as a social justice warrior today, but this was written years before, and what he writes is that she'll give up her ideals once she learns how hypocritical the game is. She'll sacrifice her ideals for the luxury apartment and the 6-figure salary, something to that effect. And well, that's what a lot of people are actually doing. And that's what a lot of people, that's how we live our lives. That's what people say, that they're in the 99%, but they really want to get into the top 1%, and they want to become, someone who's making $1 million a year. Why do so many people play the lottery? It's because they want to be rich. So what Christopher Nemelka is arguing in some of his work from 2018 is that we need to have just a one world government that is by and for the people, that is actually making decisions for the people. Politics and religion are destroying humanity. This is their platform, not mine. But they're like, politics and religion are destroying humanity, so we just all need to be having the same thing. And you would just like, it's very, very bold, I'll give them that. This was actually a plan that they had been working on since 1987. They had been working on this since 1987. And the only problem is, one of the arguments against this type of thinking, which, doesn't come from Christopher Nemelka at all, doesn't acknowledge him because he's not that famous, is that once you sort of say that you're going to have one kind of party, one religious orthodoxy, and you're just going to spread something out in all directions, whether it's imperialism or whether it's economic control, once you just spread things out in all directions, like sort of a modern day imperialism, you are asking for destruction. Because guess what? It's not that easy, and you have to go through a whole lot of hell before you actually get to this kind of, not really a utopian, but this kind of worldview that you have. You actually have to go through all this destruction to actually get to that worldview. I mean, people have had things like the Soviet Union. We've had things like Maoist China that aren't exactly on par with what Christopher Nemelka is talking about, but look at the fundamentals. They want a one-party, one-world government, the Humanity Party. They want a one religious orthodoxy, which just means that there is no practicing religions. It's just your sort of internal thoughts. And they want to just spread wealth and money around to everybody, and they just want to give people money. I mean, the reason that I mentioned the Humanity Party on this channel the first time, and Christopher Nemelka, was that I was talking about the candidate Andrew Yang. And Andrew Yang is someone who's all about universal basic income, UBI. Andrew Yang wants to give people $1,000 a month, ages 18 to 64. But the Humanity Party had this whole thing where they were just like, we cannot give people cash. If you give people cash, they'll just buy drugs. They were the first people that I ever heard say that. It was actually Christopher Nemelka talking. They were the first people I ever heard say that you cannot give people cash. They will just buy drugs. You need to do this in a voucher system. And people complain about food stamps or something. You need to be putting everybody on food stamps, essentially. That's essentially what they want. Everyone gets a voucher system that can be used to buy certain food items, only food deemed healthy, as well as other things like education, shelter materials, and medicine and clothing. These things all need to be provided through a voucher system. And the reason why you do that is because then if you just provide people with the basic necessities of life, massive reductions in things like child prostitution, massive reduction in things like the opioid epidemic, I mean, it's just going to change. But the reason why I decided to do this segment called Christopher Nemelka Evil Ideas is because I was listening to sort of an interview that he did back in June. I was listening to that earlier today, and he was saying some things when he was just like, once again, halfway in, halfway out. He's halfway into crazy when he's saying that he does not believe in listening to other people. I repeat, does not want to hear things from other people, because he's like, when someone comes to me and says, I really like your platform, but I would rather change this thing, or I really like what you say about religion, except for this, I want to do this differently. He's like, that person who is coming to him and just getting him to try and change, that person is not focused on the ideas. That person is not focused on the actual political action. That person is focused on their own ego. They want to be the one with the master plan. They want to be the one who's at the top. That person is focusing on changing things for themselves. So it's like, it's just, once again, it's like halfway in. I totally understand what you're saying, but you're just coming across in this very bizarre and twisted and peculiar manner where it's also just comes across as very arrogant. I mentioned this in the Humanity Party upload when I was like, they call themselves the people who have the solutions. No one else does. That's their slogan. The Humanity Party has the solutions. No one else does. So what I was just like, I mean, that's just very, very arrogant and sardonic, and it gives you kind of this downturned response, but it's also meant like, you're not supposed to challenge this. You're not supposed to challenge. You're just supposed to submit before our one world government. You're supposed to submit before the ideas that we're telling you to believe, and we're going to spread this out to the entire world. And, that could be just asking for catastrophic events to happen. It really could be. Now, there's some other ways that we can kind of approach this situation. I've thought for years that there are people out there who have ideas that would work. Like if you were to put their political plans into action, You could have a society like that. Why would somebody like Christopher Nemelka be different? Like, if you were actually to implement Christopher Nemelka's ideas into action of having a one world government, one religious orthodoxy, and just going to be spreading money out to all the people of the earth so they have their basic necessities, it's about removing these barriers that are problematic in life. That's what he wants to do. He wants people to all believe the same thing, just that, there's nothing outside of the human body other than the only thing that he calls God is the human sense of self-direction and the moral compass, and he wants everyone to believe that. And then you're saying that there can only be one political party called the Humanity Party, a government by and for the people. Would that actually work? Well, once again, it's like some people, I mean, I can just imagine, some 18-year-old college kid just be like, if that would have worked, wouldn't we have done it already? I mean, I could imagine someone saying that from kind of, a uninformed but very critical perspective. And I think so much of the ideas that are out there, maybe they could actually work if someone actually put them into action, and you could actually have a society structured that way. It's just a matter of choosing which way to go. But at the same time, when you have 7 billion people, and soon we're going to have 9 billion people on the planet Earth. You ever heard that? That we're actually going to get up to 9 billion people on the planet Earth, and then it's going to kind of like level off and reach sort of a plateau. It's just the amount of problems that come with trying to get 9 billion people to be thinking in the same way. And furthermore, if this is so easy to get people to follow one political party for the planet Earth, to get one belief system for the planet Earth, and to get wealth distributed for the entire planet Earth, why on earth do we have to use this guy's plan? Why do we have to use Christopher Nemelka's plan? Why can't we just use something else that already exists? Say, for example, I don't know, Jesus or the Prophet Muhammad or the Democrat Party, the Republican Party. Why don't we just use their platforms? I mean, why do we have to use some guy that people don't really know that well? I mean, it sounds kind of bizarre, but it's like, I mean, that might sound a little bizarre and like somewhat of an extreme example, but it's just like, why do we have to go with just this one plan? And this is one of the reasons why humanity does not work too well in that particular context. And that's why people who are opposed to the concepts of a single belief system, a single political party, and massive imperialism that's what they're saying. They're just like, the answer is not just to get everybody under the same blanket statement. The answer is to get people to peacefully coexist. One way of thinking is not the answer. Peaceful coexistence is the answer. If that's just like what you would call your one way of thinking, that's the one thing that everybody has in common. It's just respect and acknowledgement of difference. It's like you can recognize that somebody is different and you don't want to kill them. Like, that could be a start for humanity. But if one of the things is just, with so many politicians out there, they're sort of trying to get away from something such as democracy. I kid you not, there are many people out there who just don't want democracy. What they want is kind of what Plato talked about with the philosopher king. And in the 21st century, I don't think we're going to be using that terminology. Christopher Nemelka is not a philosopher king. He's a spokesperson who is representing a large platform. But it's just like, it's more just getting people to recognize that arguing back and forth about ideas kind of leads to a watered down end result. So what we can do is we can present these ideas in a way where it's like, you're just accepting that this person or this group, the ideas that Christopher Nemelka are representing, this is what we're going to do. We're going to go with this plan. I'm not going to challenge it. I'm not going to argue it. I'm going to go with this plan. It's not exactly Plato's philosopher king, but it's somewhat similar, where it's like, hey, he has good ideas. Let's use his plan for world governance. Pretty much, though, it's like, I mean, you're not arguing, you're not trying to change it, because that's kind of what Nemelka is talking about. Once you sort of have that mindset where it's like, I'm allowed to argue against this, I'm allowed to challenge this, I'm allowed to change this, it's like, then you just don't really get anywhere. It's just this kind of constant back and forth. It's getting pulled in all directions. And then the people aren't even creating the policies anymore. the political climate is creating the policy, and that's the world we live in today. And I think a lot of parties are in agreement with that. That's why they're opposed to things like bureaucracy. But when it comes to actual things about evil, I mean, that's the title of this, Christopher Nemelka, Evil Ideas. Well, what I would say to that is, we just have some things such as trying to get all people to think in the same way at the same time. That sounds a little bit like brainwashing. Trying to get all people to follow one political allegiance. That sounds a little bit like North Korea, to be honest. I mean, like, is that what these guys are talking about? And also, just the concept of spreading, wealth throughout the world, this massive distribution, one party, one world government, one just massive way of thinking that has to be distributed. And it's not only thoughts, it's money too. They want this UBI in the form of a voucher system. They want this universal basic income in form of a voucher system, which would provide people with the basic necessities of life. But if it were possible, I mean, would we just do that already? Or do we live in a world that has the private sector being controlled by the public sector, or the public sector being controlled by the private sector? Who's really running the show? You really have to wonder sometimes. But what I would say is that it just really comes across as, there are a few insightful lines that get mixed in with a bunch of loud, arrogant, and controlling ideas, and they want all of humanity to be thinking in the same way, to be believing in the same way, as opposed to simply recognizing, hey, this person comes from a different tradition than I do, but I don't hate him. But I don't hate him, therefore I don't have to hate him. Why can't we just come to sort of an understanding like that first, as opposed to just recognizing politics, religion, all of this has to go. We're only going to be thinking in one way, living in one way, and believing in one way. That sounds a little bit extreme to me. But when it comes to some other things about Christopher Nemelka, this is the guy who I mentioned in the previous recording, so I didn't talk about it this time, that he was saying that he was the reincarnation of Hiram Smith in, the Mormon church, like Joseph Smith, that he is the reincarnation of Hiram Smith, and that he is, he said that he had translated the sealed portion of the Book of Mormon, later said that that came out as a hoax. He definitely has some things that he said in the past that are genuine hoaxes that are not true. But the problem is, though, when you're dealing with political things like the Humanity Party, and you're dealing with things like a one-world government that you say you want everyone to have, that becomes something different. Because then, it's not about just believing it. It's now about actions, and these are going to affect people in this world. We're not talking about, in the afterlife. This is not for the kingdom of heaven. No, this is for the planet Earth. So we always have to be aware of that stuff. And people really, really, it's like if you're going to be out there selling some type of woo-woo, these things are really going to affect people in the real world. But the reason I titled this Evil Ideas was, I wanted to just kind of ask the question, is it evil to try and get people under one political party, under one belief system, and force a particular way of life on the entire planet Earth? Do you think that that is a good thing or an evil thing?